All right, so it's Sunday, and I'm going to do a coronavirus update. One of the principles that we believe in is that all truth is part of the gospel. So the things we can learn about what's going on are able to be circumscribed into one great whole. So I have some helpers here with me. Oh, but they all ran away. Maybe they'll be back to talk about coronavirus and straighten out hopefully some of the things that you've heard about in the news and give some answers. So to start with, I want to talk about what a coronavirus or other viruses commonly look like. This is not coronavirus. This is actually a schematic artist's rendition of the HIV virus, but there's some similarities. You see these pictures on the news and on TV with a round ball and all these little things sticking out of it, right? Those things are really important. We're going to talk about why. Inside of a virus are these strands of either DNA or RNA, and we'll talk about them as well. So these things that stick out are kind of like hands sticking out. One of a virus's jobs is to trick the body into thinking that they're nice, they're okay to be taken in, that they're not foreign or of malicious intent. So this picture obviously there's a cutaway here. So if we were looking at the actual virus, it would just be a ball with a surface like this and these green hands sticking out of it, okay? When we breathe the coronavirus into our lungs, it is drawn down through our airway into our lungs, and it has to hit certain receptors. And if I magnify this spot up here into much larger, you can see the virus with its little hands sticking out. And then on the surface of what we call epithelial cells, epithelial is just a fancy word for surface. So they're kind of the guard cells to the rest of the lung tissue behind. On the surface there are receptors. And the idea is a cell doesn't have eyes to see who's knocking at the door to get in. So they have these receptors, and if the receptor fits whatever is coming in, then they say, oh, we recognize you as a friend, you can come in. If it fits a different type of site, oh, we recognize you as foreign, and we're going to activate the immune system, right? So COVID-19 has a lot of these little things out here, hoping that one of them will look friendly. When it doesn't look friendly, this is a diagram that I pulled out of one of our textbooks that I think is helpful. So part of what happens is a lot of times it's basically random chance, whichever one presents to the receptor on the cell. And most of these are going to look foreign. So this is an example of what happens there. Pollen is another thing that we breathe into our lungs a lot. And it binds to receptors here on these epithelial cells. And it's recognized as foreign. And that recognition means that there's a whole cascade of immune system cells and histamine that releases and causes mucus secretion and swelling and lots of other cells to come to the area to take care of that foreign thing. But let's talk about when it binds as friendly. So you've heard on the news about ACE2 receptors. So coronavirus 19, some of its hands are designed to bind to a receptor we know about in the lungs called ACE2. And when that happens, these epithelial cells say, oh, this is a friendly something. It's supposed to be there. And they open up a channel, and that viral RNA or DNA can get into the cell. When that happens, our cells are really good at reading the genetic code, reading whatever it is that this genetic sequence calls for, and producing it. Well, what does the viral RNA or DNA call for? More copies of itself. So the virus takes over, hijacks the machinery of the cell, using ribosomes, the Golgi apparatus, those things you learned about in cell biology in high school, and kicks it into high gear so that this epithelial cell that was once guarding access to lung tissue is now a factory for production of coronavirus copies. And it will run that process high speed until the cell bursts, makes enough copies that the cell ruptures and gets now into deeper lung tissue. Repeated cell death in this area will lead to inflammation, scarring, and fibrosis of the lungs. There's a nice picture of that here in other page of this book. There's activity going on both sides. So this is trying to show a cross section of an airway tube or a bronchial in our lungs, right? And when we breathe in something foreign, antibodies can bind to it. Some of our circulating white blood cells, immune cells, can activate to it. And there's a process that leads to inflammation. Right? Antibodies will bind up to it. Inflammatory cells will locate to that place. And all of this activity is designed to get rid of whatever it was activated the immune response. But the side effect is damage to epithelial cells and the cells underneath them. And that leads to scar tissue and fibrosis. This is why you'll hear about after patients recover from coronavirus infection and the pneumonia that's caused, their lung capacity is reduced afterward because of all that scarring, and it takes time. Some, depending on how bad it is, some of that scarring will remain there. Okay, what about what we've been hearing in the news about drugs that affect ACE receptors? So we know that coronavirus impacts ACE2 receptors in the lungs, and that has led a lot of people to speculate about the different drugs that we know that also interact with ACE2. High on the list are NSAIDs like ibuprofen, naproxen, meloxicam, aspirin. Many of these are over the counter, many are prescription as well, and are commonly prescribed for people. So here's my response. There is some evidence to suggest that prolonged use of NSAIDs of various kinds, and by prolonged use I mean greater than 2 weeks consistently, can cause the cells in our body to increase the number of ACE receptors on their surface membranes. So that, knowing that, has led at least one doctor in France to say, oh, it might be that if you have more ACE receptors present, you may be more susceptible or you may get worse disease. That's a nice theory. It kind of makes sense, but there's no evidence that this has led to more severe COVID-19 infection. So there are a lot of people looking at this and breaking down the data as death statistics occur and things like that from other countries. So far, the data aren't falling out to show that, oh, of all the people who died, more of them had been using NSAIDs than not. That's just not a thing that's happening. The other thing is, for this theory to even work, you would have to be on NSAIDs daily, multiple times a day, for a prolonged period of time. And if we're talking about using ibuprofen to control the fever from contracting coronavirus, that's not going to upregulate the ACE receptors on your cells or make the risk worse. So there's no risk, even theoretical risk, from using ibuprofen to help someone's fever if they come down with coronavirus. So I hope that helps differentiate a little bit. Other medication classes, ACE inhibitors and ARB blood pressure medications. As the name implies, they act at the ACE receptor sites. These are very common blood pressure medications and with real benefit for people for whom they're prescribed. High blood pressure, heart disease, congestive heart failure, kidney disease, diabetes, many conditions that these are used for. The American Heart Association, American Academy of Chest Physicians, the European Heart Association all have come out saying there is no need to change off of these medications during this pandemic. And in fact, interestingly enough, there's some preliminary evidence from Europe suggesting that people who are on these medications may actually derive some kind of benefit. But that's early data and has not yet been peer-reviewed. Finally, what about possible treatments? We've heard a lot in the news lately about medications that might be effective against coronavirus. Before I jump to those, let me just jump to the recommended treatment for the respiratory viruses like coronavirus is supportive care. That's medical speak for acetaminophen for fevers and aches, IV or oral hydration to keep people from getting dehydrated, airway support, monitoring their oxygen saturation, the ventilators that we're hearing a lot about that are needed in ICUs, and bronchodilators. There's a little controversy because they're saying that in the news that I think they kind of misinterpreted this, but there was concern that using a nebulizer was harmful. That's not true. Nebulized albuterol is very helpful to infected patients. The problem is they're worried that nebulizer aerosolizes droplets that could contain infectious material and spread the disease to the caregivers around the person being nebulized. So for that reason, they are favoring use of inhalers instead of nebulizers. But to be clear, it's the same active ingredient, and both are very helpful to the patient themselves. Chloroquine or hydroxychloroquine, you've heard about by now in the media, as well as azithromycin. This is the combination that has been used in France to some effect. The problem here again is it was a small sample, it was not a randomized study, and it was used to treat patients who were already in the ICU. We don't know enough yet as to whether or not it would be beneficial to be taking this beforehand. There's still a lot of question around this. Everyone's jumping to hope, and I don't blame them, but there's no reason to call your doctor and ask for a prescription of this yet. We're learning a lot really fast, and I think it is not unreasonable to wait and let us figure this out before we start jumping to conclusions or cause unnecessary taking of medication that may not actually be beneficial. Another medication being investigated right now is remdesivir, which was developed initially as an Ebola treatment that is showing some promise in test tube type studies. They're ramping up to try and study it in animal models and hopefully human models soon. There are also a lot of companies working on developing treatments derived from the antibodies of recovered patients. So treatment that has been known for a long time is to take the serum from a recovered patient and transfuse that to infected patients. And the antibodies that were produced in the recovered patient can benefit the infected patient. With our modern gene technology, we are rapidly trying to build those antibodies specifically and make that as a treatment that's available to patients. I think there's some promising things coming there. Last but not least, thank you for hanging in there on this kind of long video. What about antihistamines? Right now, I think they're beneficial on a simple level because seasonal allergy symptoms can confuse the presentation, and we are in allergy season. It's not uncommon for allergy to mimic an upper respiratory infection because you get all the mucus production, the coughing, you can even get the aches and things like that make you think, oh, I'm coming down with something. So taking an antihistamine, keeping those allergy symptoms under control can help you differentiate actual infection versus allergies. The other thing that I think is beneficial with antihistamines is that they can reduce or slow down that inflammatory response that leads to the pneumonia and lung fibrosis that is really the scary part of getting a coronavirus infection. So I hope that has been helpful and answered some of your questions. There is obviously more to learn as time goes on, and I'll try and keep everyone updated. Thank you for your attention.